Welcome everyone. This is the co-op industry panel event, and we'll be starting off today with Michael Pearce. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Michael Pearce. I'm a indie game developer, currently developing a game in Western Australia called Miska Tiny Tail. My company is Tinyware Games.
Lovely. So we'll be doing presentations with everyone, as you'll soon see. And we'll be doing Q&A after. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to whack them in the chat, and we'll be recording them, and then we'll make sure to present them during the Q&A section at the end. You are also welcome to ask them during said section. But yeah, take it away, Michael.
Awesome. So yeah, today I'm just basically going to be going over my experiences and journey leading up to becoming a game developer. Because I think, especially as an indie game developer, like there's lots of things that people kind of have expectations of what it should look like, what it should be. But the reality of it is very kind of like it's very messy, and like that's okay. So I guess this is my story. So how did I start becoming a game developer? So this is a picture of me and my brother when I was probably about 7 years old. We're literally playing a computer at my grandparents' house because we always had a huge desire to explore and play games. Even from this young age, we were completely, enthusiastic and always loved to play all sorts of games. So these are some of the games that we played growing up. Hopefully, you recognize some of them. Um, and these worlds and these experiences like completely captured our imagination. But for me and my brother, at least, we wanted to do a little bit more with them. We didn't just want to play them; we actually wanted to open them up and experience like how they're made. So even back then, there were a few times where we actually opened these games up and just kind of figured out how to edit textures and do mods and those type of things. So we're always thinking about that type of stuff even back then. So my first experience actually developing a game was around 2012 when I was in early high school. So this project, which I call Project Toys, really began as a way for me to learn 3D modeling. I always had an interest in the art of games, so I wanted to try making models in a game. And obviously, like you can see, the at this time especially, it was not great. But like that's completely fine. That was part of the learning experience. This was my first time using Unity, which is the game engine I chose at that time. And it was a really great learning experience because, like, even though everything I created, looking back at it now, is obviously like, very basic. I kind of got a good sense of the world and like actually controlling everything in 3D. And I think learning those things are very vital. So the most valuable thing I got out of this project was actually just, I guess, toying with things and seeing how they work. After about a year working on that, I sort of got a bit more serious about it, and I expanded the project into something more of a game. So previously, it was supposed to be like a fun, friendly platformer, but I actually found that um, there was a greater sense of, I guess, atmosphere in turning those friendly child environments into something more like a horror game. So that's exactly what I did. I basically turned Project Toys into this horror experience where you played as a little girl and you basically roamed around a house that's empty, trying to solve what happened. So even back then, I was really trying to think about how I could use lighting and really make it really ground the environment and make it the best it can be. But this project was just something I did in my personal time throughout high school. It was very small, but it was what started getting me thinking about, like, okay, I really enjoy this. How can I push this forward? So in 2015, one of my favorite movies came out, which was Jurassic World. My brother and I have always been huge Jurassic Park fans, so when a new movie came out with Jurassic World, that was like a big pivotal point. So one day in my spare time, I began modeling a building, the key building from Jurassic World, which is the Innovation Center. And from there, I just kept basically going with the park and recreating all of these other buildings in this new park that they showed off. And that eventually became this project called Jurassic World 3D Project. So I expanded it into a much larger project, which covered the whole park. And by sharing the little progress I had online, that basically led me to form a small team of game developers who had very similar interests, and that was really a pivotal turning point for me because it went from basically learning game development alone. Now I was doing it with a team of other people. So after that initial project, we decided to take it a bit more seriously and again take it to the next level by really working on it. So we ended up working on this for about 3 years. This is called Jurassic Explorer, and this basically took everything that we did from the original Jurassic project and made it into a proper game with explorable locations, dinosaurs. It had like a lot unlockables, all sorts of things, and this was a really successful, great project for us. So it was used as a tool to learn game development together while we were all working on something that we equally had a passion for, which was Jurassic. And by the end of it, once we released the project to everyone for free, it had over 100,000 players to date and well over 10 million views on YouTube in total. So we're very, very lucky to have that experience and to work on such a fascinating project together as a team. But we basically took those experiences that we learned from this fan project and the skills that we had built over time to then work on our own projects after that. So my programmer from that team actually wanted to create this game called Isle Vatra. So he approached me to do some of the art for it. So I worked with him for a while doing that game. And that was my first experience with Unreal Engine. And that's when I really began to learn programming through blueprints. And once I got comfortable with that, I started to kind of part ways and work on my own original project, which you'll be seeing shortly. So this is basically a summary of my whole game development history up until this point. So this is my game, Miska Tiny Tail, which I've been working on for about 2 years. We started it in 2020, and it's basically me and my development team taking 8 years of experience and knowledge from our past projects and putting it into our first commercial game. So we're creating a world that's a culmination of our childhood games and experiences. So as you could see before, I grew up with a lot of Nintendo games, lots of platformers, all those type of things that really remind us of things that we grew up with. And we're aiming to create a really fun 3D platformer that everybody can enjoy. And we're lucky enough to actually also be having this come to Nintendo Switch. So we're also working on the Nintendo Switch version. So how did we do it? The importance of perspective. It's very important to recognize that, all of this stuff doesn't happen overnight. Like, it's sort of surreal looking at this presentation and seeing like all these different projects and all these steps that I've taken over the years and putting it into like, a very condensed slide. But the reality is that all of these steps took a long time. and all these projects take a long time. Pretty much each project took about 3 years on average to work on, and there was so much software and all sorts of techniques that I learned along the way. So it's really something that you just have to keep working on day by day and chipping away at. Now, how's a game made? A game, if you simplify it to its most basic form, is comprised of music, which I believe is the soul of your game, programming, which is the brains of your game, art, the personality of your game, and game design, the feel of your game. So these four things are the main ingredients of a video game. For me, I pretty much touch all of these myself as a lead developer. I think I'm definitely strongest at art and game design, but we have a music composer, luckily, and he handles a lot of that. But either way, no matter what you're going to be doing, when you're an indie game developer, there's going to be lots of different hats that you're going to be putting on, and you're going to pretty much be touching all of these things. So part of learning how to touch those things is basically the importance of self-learning. So you need to get into the habit of teaching yourself how to learn through resources online. So these resources are already available to us, and this is something that we're so lucky with now with the internet. Having YouTube tutorials, having Reddit for feedback, Discord, even like right now, for live help, and Google to Google all of these questions that you might have, or any bugs that you might come across. Those resources are incredibly helpful, and those are things that we use every day as game developers. Obviously, no matter what you face as a game developer, you're going to be using these. So definitely use them to your advantage. Pick a game engine. So if you haven't already, definitely look at which game engine you want to use for your project. These are just two of the main game engines that we see, Unity and Unreal Engine. But there's obviously a lot more out there, and the engine that works for you completely depends on the game that you're building. So I started off learning Unity first because it was a little bit easier to approach, and generally it's a bit quicker to learn. But I eventually moved on to Unreal Engine for some of my larger projects, which took a lot longer to dive into, but I felt like I got a lot more out of it once I really got into it. So it really depends on your game. So making prototypes is very important. We made a ton of prototypes to kind of figure out which ideas worked and which didn't. So I highly encourage you, especially if you haven't made a full game, to just keep working on different prototypes and keep pushing them out. It's much better to have a bunch of completed prototypes than a uncompleted full game. So when it comes to game ideas, make sure you make a game that you will want to play yourself. It's not going to help you if you're making a game that you're not interested in. I don't think you'll have the passion for it as well. So it's, especially as an indie developer, definitely put out there what you want to see in the world. So start small and cut yourself some slack. So this is a good thing about perspective. I know, especially being an indie developer and a very small team, we've had very, very big moments where we basically looked at other games and been like, oh gosh, like how are we ever going to do this? Or is our game ever good enough? But what you have to keep in mind is all these games out there, most larger games have around 100 developers. They usually have a budget between 30 to 300 million. They usually work on these games to 3 to 7 years of full-time work, and each developer on those teams has usually been in the industry for over 10 years. So being a solo developer or a developer of a few with very little budget, and developing in spare time between a day job is very different. So keep those expectations in check and remember the resources that you have access to. Like, you can't compare yourself to those bigger games, and it also means that you have to kind of keep your game scope in check as well. Like, don't be an indie game developer trying to make the next big open world game, because it's just like, it's not really realistic, and it's also just not really fair on yourself as well. I always love to tell people to like really start as rough as they can, because I think that's an important part of the creative process. So as you can see here, we have like a few of our characters here. It usually starts off as a very rough sketch on paper, then goes to a placeholder model, and then we flesh it out in the game by the end. Same goes with level design and layout. We kind of sketch it out, and then eventually put it all together in the game. But that part of the process of making sure that it's really very quick and rough, it kind of lets us try different ideas and swap out ideas much easier. So don't be afraid of that rough and like kind of ugly state of the creative process, because it's very useful, and it's nothing that should be avoided. So I always try to tell people to make your limitations a superpower. So I'll get into how Toy Story did this too. But first, a bit of background. When we wanted to make a new game, which turned out to be Misc, we wanted to have a few goals. So we wanted the game to be character focused. We wanted it to be set in a realistic world with cartoony elements, and we wanted all of these characters to be easy to animate. The problems is I had the limitations of not being able to make organic models. I was limited in my experience with animation as well. So I really was stumped. I was like, how am I going to make a character focused game if I can't make humans? So, just if you don't know, the difference between organic and hard surface modeling, basically, hard surface modeling is what I was used to, which is anything that kind of is static and object like, such as these examples here. I was not used to organic modeling, which is humans, animals, those type of things. So having that in mind, I was like, okay, what do we do for characters if we can't do that? We ended up coming to the conclusion that robots actually would be a great fit, because it means that we could easily animate them by having floating limbs. They wouldn't have to have a mouth, so less animation there as well. And on top of that, we had a story completely based around the idea of miscellaneous items. So these robots are made of both robot parts and everyday miscellaneous items, such as cans. So it kind of ended up being like such a important part of the game, just by being our limitation. Like, it could have just been humans, it could have been something else, but because we were limited by what we could do in terms of realism, we actually went a different direction that ended up being better. So these are some of the animations that actually ended up in the game, and like we're incredibly happy with like how everything came out, and it really goes to show, how these type of things can lead to actually really great ideas, even if you're limited initially. So Toy Story did something very similar. Back in the 90s, when they were making Toy Story, CGI was extremely new, and the best thing that CGI could easily replicate was anything that looked sort of plastic. So rather than going for a more realistic movie, they actually focused on their limitation, and they made that their strength. So what they were good at animating and what they were good at rendering was anything that looked like a toy. So they made Toy Story. That's why in that movie they usually try to avoid humans and anything more realistic. So they used that as their strength and really played off it and made it their advantage. So I think you should definitely try to do that same type of thing. And now in our game, we're only 2 years in, but we've got over 50 characters and counting. And they're all completely unique and have so much more personality than what we initially wanted with like humanoid characters. So we're really happy about that. So I think it's really important that you try to form a team, um, especially if you're an indie game developer, because it can you take on so many hats that it can be very difficult to kind of work on your own, and like there's so much you have to learn from it. So I'm lucky to have a team of three. So myself as the lead developer, we have Bernard as our music composer, and Chris as our 2D artist. And it just having that sort of like culture and teamwork really helps with motivation and keeping the game going. So I think it's really important to try to form a team. There's lots of people online that you can reach out to, and even if you work in a smaller project just for a short amount of time, I think just having the experience of what it's like working in a development team, I think that's very, very valuable. Take it one fail as a time at a time. So even if it's cheesy, every failure really is a step to success. And like, yeah, it's super cheesy, but I'll always say that. Like, I really do think that we have to like really try to redefine what failure is. Because if you're going to be a game developer, you will face failure like every day. You know, game development and games in general are all about solving problems. So when you have to solve these problems, whether it's fixing code or trying to figure out how to properly design a game, all of those things will you're going to face those challenges every day. So don't let those failures, don't let those challenges get you down or become a hindrance to your progress, because you need that to grow and you need that to keep going. So just try to redefine failure and let it actually enhance your experiences. I think it's very important to find your motivation as a developer. So for me, I have many motivations, but one key one over the last few years is honestly just seeing the game evolve and come to life. Um, as an artist, I've found it incredibly just like magical to be able to translate a image from my head into something that other people can experience. And I think turning that into a video game just takes that whole experience even further by making it interactive. So that's my motivation to create games, is to share these experiences that I imagine in my head. But for you, it might be something different. And another motivation that I have personally, as you can see at the start of this presentation, my brother, just right beside me, growing up with me, he was also very much into video games. And somehow we ended up on a very similar path, and he took all of this advice that I'm giving today very much in the same way that we both grew up tinkering with games. We both grew up playing with lots of things, and he did the same with Minecraft and made many mods to that game. And now he's actually in this picture on the right as a developer at Mojang. So he is already in the games industry as well, and he made it that way by basically doing these same steps, by not being afraid of failure, by opening games up and just trying new things. I think a lot of what we've been able to achieve is just by basically not being afraid of the process of like the unknown, and just trying to try new things with game development. And so, how do you start game development? Ultimately, it comes down to just starting. So, hesitation is like really easy to do, but I think if you just try not to think too much and dive into it, experiment, don't be afraid of that failure. I think that is definitely something that you can keep going and you can do it. So yeah, I think that's everything. Um, I apologize for my voice. I'm losing my voice a little bit because I am sick right now. But if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Lovely. Yeah, guys. If you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat. And we'll list them down. And we'll start going through them. Awesome presentation. I can say that was lovely.
Thank you.
Um, so while people think of some questions, let's start off with a potentially difficult one. Thinking about your childhood, what do you say would be your most memorable or your favorite game from your childhood?
Um, I mean, for me, it's kind of going to be a weird one. Like, if I go back to this list, so I played this very obscure game for about like 15 years, and it was a anime golf game called Panya, which is right here. This is the Wii version, but I played the PC version. And it was just like a Korean online golf game that like my dad played and like got me into when I was like really really young. And it ended up surviving for like pretty much 15 years until the server shut down. So for me that was weirdly like my main childhood game. Just because I could like log into it every week and see all the updates and stuff like that. But in terms of like other games, I really loved the Pikmin games. Like Pikmin 1 and 2 for the GameCube were really big for me, and I think you can see a lot of that inspiration in our current game as well. I've always liked the idea of games that kind of adjust the perspective of the player. So like just playing as a tiny little character was really fun. Um, but yeah, there's just I don't know, too many to list.
Okay. Awesome. That's definitely a unique answer. I love it. So we do have a question from the chat, and it's: do you have any tips on getting funding as an indie studio slash getting money while making the game?
So I guess these tips that I have don't come from direct experience because currently we're completely self-funded. We don't have a publisher. We literally just do this in our spare time, out of our spare pocket money. But I've had a lot of people that I know in the indie scene that have seek publishing and have gotten all sorts of funding from different places. The number one place I would definitely say to look out for, especially in Australia, if that's where you're from, is just government grants. Because there's a few that have been coming out in Australia recently, and they really help because most grants usually you don't have to pay them back as well. So obviously that can help a lot with just I guess the future of everything. And as far as publishers, I guess it really depends what you're looking for, but most of the time the best thing you can do to try to convince a publisher is to actually have something with a little bit of public, like I guess like if you've already released a demo, for example, on Steam, if there's some pretty good public reception, and there is a way that they can actually see that, maybe this game has potential on the market, I think they're more likely to invest in your game and actually sign you up as a publisher. Um, but I guess it just really depends. Like we've tried to stray away a bit from publishers in general, just because um, I feel like personally, like we have enough knowledge and like everything that I'm pretty confident that we can get away with not having a publisher. But obviously, not everybody's in that position, and especially when it comes to like marketing and porting and all that type of stuff, publishers can be really, really helpful.
Awesome. So we've got another question. Um, so when you got started with your Toy World project, what sort of programs did you use?
So for Project Toys, surprisingly, for a long time while I was learning to 3D model, I literally didn't use any 3D modeling software. So I actually began quote unquote 3D modeling within Unity itself using the primitive assets that they had. So they had a few things like, cubes, spheres, cylinders, all that type of stuff. And I would basically grab those and basically model out of those, which is not really the right way to learn 3D modeling or 3D model at all. So for me back then, yeah, it was literally just Unity. But I think it was around the Jurassic Explorer time, which is when I started actually um, using 3D modeling software and learning that. So for that project, I used Unity for the game engine, and for 3D modeling, ever since I've used 3ds Max. I know Blender is a fantastic free alternative as well. And I honestly wish I could have learned Blender at that time, because it's much better now than it was back then. So yeah, if I was to recommend any modeling software, I would definitely recommend Blender.
Awesome. So we've got a question in regards to starting a small studio. As a studio of three, how do you feel about studios having less or maybe more people? Do you think there's like a sweet spot in the number of people that you think people who are wanting to start a studio should aim for?
I think it really depends on, I guess, like how you guys interact with each other, because like I found like maybe less than 10 people is probably like the perfect sweet spot, I would say. Just because it's big enough to get like a lot done, and have like a really wide range of like skills and abilities to cover. But it's not too big to actually like start losing track of everybody. Um, like the most important thing of being in a team is just keeping everybody updated with everyone else and what's happening within the project. And that can get really messy, especially like if you work online, and you work on like say a GitHub project where you're constantly pushing out different versions and updates of the same thing. So you kind of want to keep it small, to keep things simple. But for us, like I work in Perth. My two other game developers are in New York and Florida in the US. So uh, time zones definitely take account into this whole process as well. Usually, by the time I'm asleep, they're awake, so they can usually do a lot of the work that I don't get to do during the night. So that can be really handy as well. But if it's an in-person studio in the same location, I think yeah, definitely try to aim for I'd say at least three and no more than 10. But it kind of depends on your situation. But I think yeah, the most valuable thing is just finding developers that you really mesh well with, that you all have very uh, common interests and common goals as a team.
Okay, so our next question is about the mobile game industry. Have you considered going into the mobile sphere? And if so, what are your thoughts and feelings about the mobile game industry?
So I've actually had a little bit of experience working on mobile games before. So I made a game, a very short game project called Mr. Zumi, which was for a company that I worked for in Belmont, and it was just like a little project that I did for I think it took like 4 or 5 months. Um, but that was really interesting. Just basically like working in mobile sort of environment, and I've never really considered doing that for myself, just because I think the mobile game industry is just so differently structured than PC and console games. Most games in that sphere are, focused on free to play, usually very microtransactions. They'll usually have some sort of gacha or like, lucky box type of system to win costumes or anything like that. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time, but the way I personally like try to approach games is like give the player everything that they need, that complete the game, and then once they buy the game, that's it. I think there's a big trend in games a lot in the recent years, and especially on mobile games, is that like they'll just basically push out something and then either update it later or sell you the rest of the game through DLC, which I know a lot of players don't really like. So I really try to like complete everything before like releasing extra stuff on top of that. So for me, like the mobile games industry isn't really like something that I think about often. Um, but everybody's different. I think that there's a lot of opportunities there for people that do want to seek that and do want to go into that industry.
Awesome. So, as a indie developer and a part of a team of three, what are some of the pros and cons that you found with working with a team of that sort of size, and particularly working as a part of a company where you're sort of responsible for funding and things like that?
I mean, definitely the cons are just like not having enough resources. Like I said, like we all do this between our day jobs. We're a very small team, and we are just kind of doing this out of like the passion of the project. So like definitely we face a lot of times where I wish we had like an extra programmer or whatever, or if we had proper funding, then we could potentially like just drop our day jobs and work on this full time. That would be fantastic. But I guess like it's just something that we've personally come to terms with when starting this project, and it's something that works for us. But it's definitely has its challenges. It's definitely something that could be better. But we end up working out. Everything ends up working out quite well for us because it kind of gives us the space to be creative. It lets us be a lot more flexible than I think a lot of people who have like publishers, for example. They can then tend to have lots of rules and kind of be tied down to whatever the publisher wants. We have a lot more freedom in terms of that. Um, and we also just try to keep things like mental health and flexibility really like very open between ourselves, because like there's no pressure to release the game at a specific time. There's no pressure to do anything at a particular time. So we kind of have it a bit more open and free. But yeah, having a smaller team is definitely good for like I guess keeping all ideas close. But it also means you have to do more as an individual, and you have to um, put more in your plate. So I guess there's that.
Awesome. So we've got another question. So the Jurassic Explorer game seems to be very successful, with something like 100,000 plus players. Is there anything that you could potentially give and why you think it was so popular?
I think it was definitely popular because like it's from an existing franchise, so like there was already a predisposed like love for it, like no matter what it was, like people who are in the Jurassic community probably would have enjoyed it. I'm definitely part of that Jurassic community, so like I completely understand that. We were lucky enough to get our game covered by really big YouTubers in that community that have millions of subscribers. So with all of their like videos, which had like millions of views on top of it, we got a lot of exposure through them. So we had people downloading our game after they watched the video. We had people doing their own videos after they watched that or played the game. So it kind of spread that way. And it was something that we never even accounted for when making the project. We didn't make it to do that. We never even expected them to pick it up, but it just happened over time. So it was kind of like a weird thing to experience, like making a project just for fun, for free on our own time, and then like it kind of blowing up overnight after we had been finished with it. So yeah, it was really nice to like get that appreciation and like really see that I guess like our work had value and had like people really enjoying the game that we created. But it was definitely never something that we expected.
I can imagine the joy that comes from seeing a project you're already done with blowing up like that.
Yeah, it was just really nice, like just seeing people make their own videos. Like they still I've seen people like still making videos and uploading videos about the game, and it's like we haven't worked on it for years, but it's just crazy.
Okay. Um, in regards to the projects that you've worked on and your current project, Misk, as a concept artist, like as a 2D artist, would you say that there's less or more work as an indie developer? Do you think that concept artists should maybe multi-skill, or do you think that there's enough work as a concept artist focused game developer in the indie space?
I think it depends on what game and what team you're in. So for example, we have a 2D artist on our team. If I go to it, Chris is our 2D artist, and like he's been so helpful um for our game because like he joined a little bit later, and before then it was just me like making these awful really rough sketches on paper when designing a character. But what he does when he comes into the design process is he basically takes these little ideas that I might have, or ideas of his own as well, and then like basically transforms them into something much more fleshed out. And that's really helpful in the design process. So like every time we have characters or environments or anything like that, I always run it past him, and that stuff happens all the time and is very frequent. So I think there's definitely, at least for our team, enough work for that. Um, but in another game where like maybe it's a bit more technical or maybe it's not so focused on the visuals, that could be something that is maybe not as required. Um, I know for some teams, they actually, especially smaller teams, they can just like not even have a like concept artist because maybe they use assets from like the Unity or Unreal Engine marketplace instead of like making their own art assets. So that type of stuff if they're really limited. But I think you'll find any team that actually has their own artist. Especially if they're only 3D artists, I think it's very valuable to have a 2D artist on as well. So it kind of works together. So
Awesome. Um, so in relation to Perth and sort of the local indie and game dev scene, do you partake in many events, say like meetups and events, and game jams in general?
Yes, I'd definitely try to go to as many as I can. There's a fantastic group called Let's Make Games in WA, and they like organize every year a event called Perth Games Festival. So we've been in the last two years that they've done them, but they've been running that for many years. And that's basically an event in the city where people can come in and play a bunch of games made by local developers. So that's one event that's really fantastic. We were actually recently at a event hosted by the WA Museum that was all about celebrating games in a very similar way. So our game was there. People could come in and play our demo, and I actually got on stage and did a very similar talk to this one today as well. So like those events are not just fantastic, obviously, to show off our game and get impressions and feedback, but the most valuable thing I get out of it is meeting other developers locally, talking to them about their experiences, giving them advice, getting advice from them. That type of stuff is like so valuable as a game developer, and I think like it's really important to try to keep up with that community side of it because like this industry is small ultimately. Like it's a very small community, and people who are in it usually stay in it for a long time because it's such a difficult thing to get into and to learn and to keep learning. So you kind of want to know people around you and you want to like make those friends and stick with it. So I definitely recommend like trying to go to those if you're interested in game development. If you're looking for any advice, it's fantastic. There's so many people out there with resources that they can help you with. And we're always open to talking to people and like directing them and helping them get into the industry. So yeah, I think that's definitely a great place to start. Just like go on Facebook. I know there's Let's Make Games. I think there's other groups as well. But yeah, just try to look for those type of resources out there and try to connect with those communities.
Conveniently, this is a stream from one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've got another question in relation to 3D art. So as a 3D artist, and especially a 3D environment artist, what do you find to be one of the more difficult things that you've had to learn, and maybe something that you would give as advice for developing 3D artists to potentially work on?
So like the hard thing for me, like honestly, sort of like what I said in my presentation, it was originally characters. That was the hardest thing because doing environment art, you never do characters really. You do all sorts of stuff that is hard surface. So I was very used to making normal everyday objects, but when it came to actually turning those into characters, it was a completely different process. And on top of that, as a 3D environment artist, it's very rare that you actually come into many situations where you need to do much animation. Usually, the animation you would usually do in that field is very basic things that can be programmed, such as like if you're trying to get a river to like flow nicely, or if you're like setting up code to make a fan spin, those type of things. So learning, I guess, like rigging and actually animating all these characters by hand, like that was a really big learning process for me. But it was also extremely like rewarding as well, just seeing these characters come to life and yeah, just like once you put them in the game, you give them characters, you give them a voice and a storyline. Like that's the most magical process that I could ever go through. So like I found a lot of like I've got a lot of reward out of that as a 3D artist, but that's probably like the most difficult thing. Definitely characters for me. Um, but as far as the environment work goes, I guess it's just about figuring out how to make everything consistent as well. So for our game, you play as a character that's only about 3 centimeters tall, and there's a lot of technical aspects that you don't really think about. You're just like, okay, well, we're going to make like a cup and a can and all this stuff that is like really big to this character. But then you have to realize that if you're playing as a character that is that small, all of the textures, all of the details have to scale up to that character's size. So you actually have to make everything like, triple as detailed as they normally would be in a typical environment because they're so much bigger. So you kind of have to keep that stuff in mind. But yeah, it's been a really fun, enjoyable process.
Awesome. Right. So, uh, as a as an indie developer having to sort of promote his own projects, um, how have you gone about promoting the games you've developed, and are there any particular tips that you would really recommend that maybe some people don't think about or maybe overlook?
I mean, our main form of promotion is honestly just through Twitter. Our Twitter has been a really useful tool. My day job, typically is actually doing marketing, so I have a lot of experience with like trying to think about the way to approach these things and how to get word out there. But we have so many resources available to us already that we can actually use for free. So I'd definitely say, make sure you have things like a Twitter. Make sure if you have a game demo ready, get a Steam page up. Get the word out there as soon as you can. As soon as there's something visual in your game, begin promoting it. Because you kind of want to you kind of want to set things up so then people can start following your game development journey. Um, Once your game is starting to come together, it's better to get the community involved as well, because they kind of like having a bit of input. It helps you. You help them by putting their stuff into your game as well. So kind of think of that type of stuff. And obviously there's a little bit of organic stuff that happens, like if we're in Perth, it's a bit of a smaller place, so if you attend events, then other game developers in Perth are most likely going to hear about you, which might kind of keep that spreading as well. So yeah, just like keep trying to go, and like, yeah, I think that's my main advice.
Awesome. I think that's some awesome advice and some good stuff. So with the time that we have left, would you like to show off the game trailer?
Yeah, sure. Hopefully sound comes through, so please do let me know. Here's the trailer.
Peggy 3.
It's a great day for an adventure. You and me, why don't we go out and play? Just like the wind in the trees, I know you'll be there beside me. So come with me, let's go out in the sun. We're miscellaneous, so let's lend a hand to help everyone. We're free to be like this. We're happy to be here with all our friends so near. Looking up at the sky with you, I'll fly so high. You and
Yeah. So yeah, we've been working on that game for 2 years, and we're still working on it. So hopefully, hopefully, I'll eventually be able to say it's coming out on this date. So we'll see.
Awesome. I'm sure everyone will want to stay tuned. That looked really cool.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So we have about 5 minutes left in the time slot. We have one last question for you.
Yep.
Um, so right. So as someone that has gotten an indie project onto the Nintendo Switch, um, first of all, do you remember where you were and sort of what was happening when you heard that you were going to be able to put it on the Switch? as I'm sure that's a lifelong dream or a dream in general for a lot of indie game developers. And what sort of process did you have to go through?
Yeah, so it's such a wild thing. Like, we applied almost out of a whim because we're just like, well, we may as well apply. Like, if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't happen. Like, we weren't expecting to ever hear back anything. But when we heard back, it was just like crazy. Like, we had to double, triple check that it was actually from Nintendo. It wasn't like some weird spam email or something. It was just wild. Like, I still kind of can't believe that we're going to be on a Nintendo system, and it's been like a really amazing journey as a developer working on the Nintendo Switch version, because like there's so much that you have to learn to kind of get that process going and like figure out, like what works on a PC doesn't always work well on a handheld system as well. So there's like lots of optimization and all sorts of stuff that we've had to really focus on and keep in mind when developing the rest of the game. But it's been a fantastic experience, and like the Nintendo Switch is honestly some really impressive hardware considering it's also a portable system. I didn't think it would ever really, like work on the Switch. So I'm really happy it does. As far as where I was, I think I was just literally like reading the email on my phone. But yeah, it was definitely an incredible experience. As far as the process of like applying and all that type of stuff, it's literally like you can just go to a website called Nintendo. I think it's Nintendo Developer Portal, and there's a process that like, there's like a forum that you can fill out there and stuff like that, where you can apply there. But beyond that, I can't really say too much. And like the best advice I can give you is that obviously make sure that you have your game well into development, so then you have enough of it to show off to Nintendo, and make sure that the game that you're trying to put on a Nintendo system is actually a good fit for Nintendo. So because I really do think that they look out for games that fit their platform the best, and I think Myst was a very good fit for the Switch. So I think that was part of the reason why we got on the Switch so quickly. And obviously, good luck.
Awesome. That's pretty much it in terms of questions. Thank you very much for presenting. I'm sure everyone is very appreciative for the advice, the cool information, and the awesome sort of journey that you've shared with us. Yeah. Thank you very much again, and it's time for Paul. Are you ready to go?
Sure am. It's easy to be ready when I'm going to turn on my camera and talk to you all, so sorry for not being fancier. Alright.
No worries at all. Alright. If you want to introduce yourself and then go for it.
Hi, I'm Paul Chamberlain. I'm a software engineer. I've recently been working on a bunch of live service games, most notably Valorant at Riot Games. I've also worked on League of Legends and Fortnite. My most recent position was as a technical director at Epic Games in charge of competitive integrity and anti-cheat for Fortnite. Right now, I'm doing software engineering consulting for startups while I get some of my longer term plans cooking in the background. So hopefully I'll have something to announce in the near future. So for today, what I'm hoping to do is give you a little bit of a biographical how I got to where I am today and what I've worked on, and a little bit of generic advice on how I think people these days can find work in AAA game development. at least from my perspective as someone who's gone into there and has done a fair bit of hiring in recent years. But the vast majority, I think, will be time for questions. So feel free to hit me up with anything you would like to know about. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time. So biographically, yeah, I grew up in Perth. I went to Murdoch. I studied computer science and sort of networking, computer networking. I took whatever multimedia and games classes I could. This was in so the early 2000s, so there wasn't a games program yet. And yeah, I had two dreams, two competing career aspirations. I either wanted to be a game developer or I wanted to be a hacker. Neither were particularly plausible for someone in Perth at the time, but I stuck with it. After graduating from Murdoch, I looked around for games jobs, and in 2005 there were very few games jobs in Australia. A lot of the studios had been shutting down rather than growing at the time. So I ended up going to Canberra to work for the Australian government. And while I wasn't a hacker per se, I felt pretty close because I was working for the Australian Signals Directorate, which I guess next best thing. So I spent 6 or 7 years doing a variety of programming related technical work for first the Defence Department and then later Australian Federal Police. One of the highlights of that time was that I got sent to live in Canada for 2 years, which is where I picked up another one of my hobbies, which is ice hockey. So if you're ever looking for me while I'm in Perth, you could check the ice rink in Coburn. That's probably where I'll be. But after that time, I most of my work was sort of security focused, like it was programming, security, that kind of thing. I was lucky in my time in North America. I had met some people that work at Google, and so I interviewed at Google, and I moved to California to work there on their security team. This was 2012. At the time, I hadn't given up my dreams of making games. I'd been kind of a bunch of hobby projects on the side, nothing that was sort of worth showing off, but I had heaps of design documents and half-finished prototypes going on, and a very big League of Legends addiction. So when I got to Google, I met a whole bunch of other people who really loved League of Legends and participated in a Google internal League of Legends tournament. We didn't want to let this opportunity go to waste, so we reached out to Riot Games and asked them to provide prizes for our tournaments. And they did one better, and they said, hey, why don't we come and visit? We'll bring some casters and we'll run an event for your finals. And so there I met a whole bunch of Riot Games developers. Turns out it might have been half a celebration of our league tournament and half a recruiting event, which was a bit cheeky, but it worked out really well for me because a year later I got an offer to move to Riot Games to join their security team. So I moved down from Silicon Valley down to Los Angeles, and I started working at Riot Games. I didn't last very long on the security team. About a handful of months in, I was loudly complaining about cheating in League of Legends, probably because I was bad at League of Legends, but also I was like, hey, who's working on anti-cheat systems? Who's stopping the scripters? And the director of engineering for League of Legends at the time said, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you, like, you're a programmer, right? And I was like, sure, but not a game programmer. They're like, what's the difference? And that's how I found myself working on League of Legends. I we created a team to build some anti-cheat systems for League of Legends and overhaul a bunch of the client-server networking to make it more robust. And it was the first time I'd done any C++ programming since uni, which made me feel like a giant fake. I'm like, why am I working on my favorite game? How is this even possible? Don't they know I barely know what a pointer is? And fortunately, I got to team up with some experienced games programmers, and over the next year, we shipped a whole bunch of improvements to League of Legends that really got cheating under control. And at that point, I was like, well, what am I going to do next? And this was about the time when Riot was starting to spin up some new game development. And the executive producer of one of those new games heard that I had been doing anti-cheat and said, well, hey, I'm starting a tax shooter project and we're going to need a lot of anti-cheat help. Do you want in? And I was like, of course I do. That sounds like a real challenge. So I joined what would become the Valorant project. I was under the impression that it was like going really well and they needed me to just jump in and start working on security and anti-cheat. But it turns out that there wasn't even a prototype yet and the game didn't exist. It was basically it was just basically just an idea at that time. And so I managed. This is how I became a gameplay programmer, which was great because look, I've slid my way into that career aspiration at this point, which 10 years after the fact. But now I'm working in Unreal Engine for the first time instead of League of Legends proprietary engine, and I was one of 4 programmers trying to build the first prototype of a tax shooter that would become Valorant. That project turned out really well. If you've seen Valorant, it launched in 2020, and I worked on it from that point to release, and then sort of 6 months after release. Most of that time, I did basically a bit of everything. But for the final sort of 2 years before release, I moved back to doing security and anti-cheat work, most notably the anti-cheat system known as Vanguard that shipped with the game to try and protect it against cheats. Once the game had shipped and we'd done the first season's worth of live support, I realized I'd been working on the same game for 6+ years. At that point, I was looking for a change, and I was very fortunate that Epic Games was looking for someone to come over and run their anti-cheat efforts. So I went over to Epic Games. I ran their anti-cheat team, which was depending on how you cut it, between like 6 and 15 or so people working on keeping Fortnite esports fair, but also keeping cheaters out of Fortnite, and also making various security and performance improvements to both Fortnite and Unreal Engine. It was a really, like, one of my favorite things I've done in my career was to get some very small features into Unreal Engine. Before I shipped, I was like, well, I've spent 6 or 7 years working on this at Riot to get to like write a little bit of code that goes out to every single person who's playing an Unreal Engine game was pretty fancy. But at the end of the day, I was actually looking for a completely new challenge, and so I've left Epic, and I've been doing a bunch of programming work for game studio startups. So basically helping people with either security and anti-cheat, or actually more commonly today, it's been Unreal Engine networking, like gameplay networking, server performance, and just bits and pieces of having worked on Unreal Engine for almost 10 years now. And while that's going on, I have some grand ambitions to make some games of my own, but we'll see if I can convince someone to fund them for me. So that's the rapid fire, like who I am, kind of condensed into 10 minutes. But perhaps more importantly, like I got some commentary on the whole process. So for starters, you'll notice that like my entire career in games is predicated on meeting the right people at the right time, getting really lucky, and just having a skill that was valuable to a company, and also being known to that company at the exact same time. And so there's, with the question I get asked a lot is like, well, how do you get into AAA gaming, especially if you don't have previous games career experience? Is like, the answer is have some skill or ability that is useful to AAA developers, whether that's like a directly in games, like you're a 3D modeler, you're a gameplay programmer, or you're a environment artist, like whatever it is, a game skill, or even a adjacent skill that AAA companies need. You're a lawyer, you're a HR specialist, you're a network infrastructure person, like so basically have the ability to solve some problems that AAA studios need solved, and then second, be in a position where you'll hear about these openings when they happen, or better yet, occur to the hiring manager or someone else at the company as a plausible candidate for that job when the need arises. And like that's the hard part. So basically what I'm saying is network. Like the best way to get a job in AAA is to know someone who already works at the studios you would like to work at, so that they can recommend you for roles. And obviously they can't really recommend you, or their recommendation's not going to be particularly useful unless you have some skill that meets a criteria that the studio is hiring for. So how do you get these skills? Well, first of all, if it's a non-game related field, like you're a network infrastructure person or a lawyer, then like excellence in your field through non-games experience is the best way forward. Like if you're a lawyer who loves video games and you've got 10 years doing law stuff, you'll be a very attractive candidate to a AAA studio that's looking for a lawyer. However, that's like, no one wants to be told, hey, go get 10 years of experience. But so what can you do that's not just go out there and do a job for a decade? And it's really having the ability to show off your work, like a portfolio or some hobby projects or like a GitHub or something like that, where even if someone doesn't know you very well, you can point at something that says, hey, here's how I can solve some problems. Here is a thing I've made. Here is me collaborating with some people. And it doesn't matter if the thing you've got to show is big or small, because the people that need to see it can extrapolate out. It's like, hey, we did a game jam together. And the hiring manager can be like, oh, look, they collaborated with people, they showed off some skills, and they made a thing. I'm sure if I put them in an environment and gave them more people to work with and more time, they would be able to make something even bigger. And so having a portfolio is great, but also the networking part. And really that there's no like one way to do networking and meet people. The only the biggest piece of advice I've got there is that when you do meet people, treat them like people rather than rungs on a job ladder. It's very easy to see if someone wants to meet you because they think that you can directly lead them to a job or something. But instead, participate in game developer communities, both locally. Perth has a really great scene. But also just internationally. Follow people on Twitter, say hi, join Discord servers, participate, get to know people, and you're just much more likely to have opportunities come up when you know people and they know that you're looking for work, and then they know that you're like both a reasonable, competent human being with some skill. So that's like the best way to get into AAA is to have a skill, have someone know that you have the skill, have that person be looking to hire someone like you. Like, okay, great. What if it's not the optimal position, situation? Maybe you've always wanted to work at Riot Games, and you check their website once a month, and you see a role that looks perfect for you. If you don't know anyone at Riot Games, does that mean you're out of luck? And the answer is no, but you are starting from a disadvantage. So the first thing to do here is to realize that any job that's being advertised on a publicly facing web page probably has a really large number of applicants going for it. Most of them will be wildly unqualified, but still there'll be like a huge stack of applications for the people to review. So your job here is to make your application one that is obviously suitable for the role. The best way to do this would be, again, the networking. Like, see, even if you don't know someone at your dream company when you're trying to submit a resume, see if you can like quickly find out who the hiring manager is or something. Like, even just finding someone on Twitter who works at the company and say, hey, I'm trying to apply for a job at this company. Do you know someone who could fill me in on the details? Often that will just get you a direct introduction to the hiring manager, who gets to like fish through this stack of applications, or if not, to at least you've started a conversation, and maybe the person you're talking to will even just put your name in and make sure your resume gets to the top of the pile. Absent that, the next thing you can do is write your application in a way that directly addresses the problem that the job role is looking for. So say it's looking for a 3D artist for Valorant to make level props. In your application, you should, as soon as possible and as clearly as possible, state that you are a person who knows how to 3D model and make props. Ideally, you'll have some relevant experience you can point to, but failing that, a portfolio. Just you hear this in general career advice too, but like in situations where there's a large number of applicants for a job, each job application may only receive a handful of seconds of review. So your first goal as an applicant for one of these positions is to like pass that initial glance. Like, someone's going to look at your application. Do they put it in the pile where they look at it further, or do they skip past? And like anything you can do to like get into that look closer pile is essential. And that just is a very pragmatic. The person who is hiring for this job has some work problem they need solved. Like, hey, the next Valorant map is behind schedule because there's bottlenecks on asset creation or something, and they're like, okay, we're hiring to try and alleviate that. Will this person solve the problem that has caused me to go to the trouble of advertising a job? And so like really try and tailor how you present yourself in these applications that way. I know I've said it a few times now, but the best way in all of these is just to make some sort of human connection. Like, even a stranger, if you can have like hit someone up on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, and just have a polite conversation with them about the place they work, will like put you way ahead of the average candidate. So like, if you can, really go for that. So yeah. Alternatively, you can do what I did and get a whole bunch of career experience in an unrelated field, and then meet some game developers and get lucky and pivot. But to be honest, I don't recommend it, because it was a weird set of circumstances, and if possible, you should really try and make your own luck and not just stumble around in the dark like I did. So before we get to questions, because that part 2, just want to highlight some of the things that I built in my AAA career that I'm kind of proud of. I could just stick up a picture of Valorant and say, "Look, I built that," but I didn't. There was by the time that game shipped, there was more than 100 people working on it, and I don't know what the budget was, but it was probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So I made a very small part of it. But something from that game that I made basically by myself that I'm very proud of is the Fog of War system. It's a server side visibility system where the game server tries to figure out which enemy players each player in the game can see, and only send information about those players down to your computer. It serves two purposes. One is to prevent or limit the effectiveness of wall hacks or ESP cheats, but equally important, it's a great performance win for the server, because there's a bunch of work that goes into sending network state down to clients. And if you can shortcut it and say, hey, this client's not going to do anything with this data anyway, so we won't send it, you can get a lot of extra perf out of your server, which is important in Valorant's case, because we were trying to run our game servers at 128 tick to reduce the impact of lag and peakers advantage. But also for the economics of a free-to-play game is that the more players you can service with the same infrastructure, the more likely it is that you'll actually be able to keep paying everyone to make content for the game. We were trying to do our entire game server simulation in roughly 2.6 milliseconds, which is to say 1/3 of our 128 tick server, because we were trying to get 3 game server instances on each core of our server infrastructure. I wrote a big blog post for Riot about how the system works, but basically we took a leaf out of the graphics programmer's book, which is pre-computed potential visible sets, and which is to say we divided each level up into a grid, and for each grid square we calculated which other grid squares you could see, and we saved that all in a table. And then on the server, every time anyone moves, we go, okay, which players are in grid cells that are visible from that player's location, and it's just a table lookup rather than physics raycasts, so it's quite fast. That's a really simplified version. It gets complicated when you have to account for latency and look into the future and that kind of thing. But I'm very proud of that system. And the other thing was managing to work on the concerts at Fortnite, the Ariana Grande concert in particular. I did a little bit of back-end work to make sure that Fortnite could handle that many players, and just seeing millions upon millions of people connect simultaneously to see a concert in a game I worked on was particularly amazing. I don't really have any tech story to share there. It was just a lot of making sure nothing explodes as you add more players to, which is complicated, but not in a way that's easy to share. Okay, well, that's the autobiographical rambling part. I think if Luke's ready, we can get to the good part, which is the Q&A.
Yep. Yeah, we are.
Sweet.
I'm sure everyone's gonna take a little bit to.
Oh yeah, I just rapid
that's a
fired
lot.
that.
That's so much cool stuff though.
Oh,
Especially the concert. I can imagine that was particularly surreal. So we do have plenty of questions, which is great.
Yep.
And I'd like to start off with a question in regards to player bases for multiplayer games.
Mhm.
What's your opinion on methods for getting a sort of consistent player base. How do you feel about deploying games with bots and that sort of thing to sort of fill the player base in, especially for games such as Fortnite, where you have to have such a large number of people?
Yeah, so the it's one of the reasons why free to play is a very common paradigm for multiplayer games these days, is because you do have this bootstrapping problem where if it's a multiplayer game, it's best enjoyed with other people, but if there's no one around, there's no reason to log on to play. I think bots are almost required. Fortnite has bots. Mobile multiplayer games almost always have bots, and it's really the way you can try and bootstrap your player base. I mean, bots also have some other good benefits, like they become a good onboarding tool as well, because another problem is that if all the people who play your game have been playing it for a long time and are very skilled, it makes it a very rough experience for new players to enter that environment. So bots can help you there too. Ideally, you have a large marketing budget and you can let everyone know that you have this awesome game and that they should try it out. And that can get you over the sort of bootstrapping problem, because that's, for example, how Valorant worked. Is it had a very very strong like influencer marketing campaign, a very big publicity drive around when the game launched, and that was kind of the advertise your way through that bootstrapping problem. But for anything that's not at the scale of something like a Fortnite or a Valorant or a League of Legends, you're going to have to try and make it so it's always a good experience for someone to play your multiplayer game, even if the player base isn't there. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in a chicken and egg problem forever. And I think bots are probably the most cost-effective way to do it, because the cost you spend developing the bots doesn't scale per user. It's just a fixed development cost. Unlike, say, I've seen mobile games that are effectively almost paying people to install them. Like you just directly put in large advertising budgets to try and get people into your game. But I think bots, especially for small and medium-sized multiplayer games, I think bots are a very important way to get players in. Depends on the nature of the game. Like some games have this problem less. Like if it's asynchronous or turn-based, you can get over this hump as well. But big fan of building bots for multiplayer games.
Awesome. Lovely answer to that. I'm sure that has answered the question for them. So this one's about you mentioning wanting to make your own game. So what kind of game would you like to make, and sort of where are you looking to make it, and that sort of thing?
Oh, I've got so many options here. There's lots of games I'd like to make. One area that I think the world could use is a mech, like a mecha giant robot live service game that's not an arena shooter. That's something that, like, I'm a huge fan of those games. Of Mech Warrior, Hawken, the Gundam games. Like, love some giant robots, and I think that there haven't been enough successful giant robot live service games. So that would be one of my things that I would really consider doing if I had a budget, like and was making a live service game. Personally, though, I really love sort of like mercenary company simulation games, like the management layer of XCOM, or the very big fan of BattleTech, which has giant robots and a mercenary sim in it. So I would really like to find a way to do sort of a interactive fiction people management sim game. Like, I think that would be a lot of fun. That's probably the project I would pursue if I was doing it more at a indie scale, rather than make a enduring sort of like AAA live service game studio. I'm going to
Nice.
stop there because like I could go on for like an hour just on games I would like to make.
No, I think that's that's a pretty good encapsulation of the question. So we'll move on to our next one. And as a software engineer, would you recommend starting out in non-gaming software dev role, or do you recommend sort of jumping into indie games?
So both have pros and cons. I think that regardless of which route you take professionally, a familiarity with the modern game engines, Unity or Unreal or some of the other engines will go a long way. Um, in AAA, there are such a large variety of programming positions that almost any software engineering skill set will find some use in the big studios. There's a lot of multiplayer live service games these days are basically just filled with back-end programmers, lots of microservice development, Golang, Java, C Sharp, Node.js, infrastructure stuff like AWS, Kubernetes. So like pretty much anything can find a place in gaming, but I think that pretty much anyone in the software engineering discipline who wants to make a career out of working in games should have at least a baseline familiarity with something like Unity or Unreal Engine. That said, indie games building indie games is a great way to demonstrate to potential employers that you can ship things and that you're got a broad set of skills and you can tackle problems regardless of where exactly in which field or domain they pop up in, which is very exciting to a hiring manager.
Lovely. Okay. Our next one is: would you recommend trying to leave Perth, and move over east or outside Australia, to find work, or do you believe that staying here or staying within Australia is worth doing?
So very very much based on your personal circumstances. Perth's great. It's still my favorite place in the world. And I think it is certainly possible to build a great game development career in Perth, whether or not you prefer indie, mid-scale, or AAA development. I think you can do any of those from Perth. It's just that in some aspects you're going to be operating in hard mode. Firstly, from the networking standpoint, if for example you wanted to work at Epic Games or Riot Games, you're much less likely to run into people who have connections at those studios if you are not somewhere where they have offices. So like a major game hub like Seattle or Los Angeles would be helpful there, but that's not a deal breaker. Like, we're all getting much more familiar with conducting our social and professional lives online, and so meeting people and making those connections and building friendships that could lead to employment is just doable from Perth. No problem. The second thing that's a little bit harder from Perth is that you will be, if you're not in the location or time zone of the studio you would like to work in, then that's considered a disadvantage. It's not usually a deal breaker. I think, in my opinion, perhaps the most talented programmer in all of Riot Games lives in Adelaide. And so, like, you can build a career in Perth, regardless of what you want that career to look like, but it'll be harder in some ways. So if what you want to optimize for is like literally your career, if that's the primary thing that you're optimizing for, then moving can make sense. But that said, like you still have sort of a bootstrapping problem. Like it's scary to move somewhere without something lined up. Like if you want to move to Melbourne to look for work, then that's pretty rough. So you're like, well, if you want to try and secure a job over east or overseas before moving out there, then you have roughly the same problems as someone who's looking to do that kind of career just staying in Perth. So I think if you want to be a game developer working at big studios from Perth, this is the best time in history to try and make that happen.
Awesome. So our next question is about staying and leaving in AAA. Why in particular did you end up leaving the AAA projects that you did? Was it mainly grind or crunch or looking for something different, or were there some other reasons entirely different to those?
Yeah, so basically it's what I'm trying to optimize for. And like I'm at a point in my career where what I'm trying to optimize for is like working on projects that I find exciting with groups of people that I'm like know and trust, and projects where I have a lot of agency to impact the outcome of the project. And that's not impossible to find in AAA, but it's usually something you find in the people who are higher up in projects that are doing a lot of the hiring and vision setting and such. So when it came to Riot and Epic in particular, it was mostly I had an impact. I shipped a game, and I was looking to sort of recapture that early feel on a project where I got to have a lot of input. Basically, I had such a good time on the first like 2 years of the Valorant project that I'm like, could I make a career just out of doing like that part, which more specifically was when Valorant was growing from like 10 to 50 people, and everyone worked on everything, and everyone had a big outcome on how that game ended up shaping up. From a were these good places to work? They absolutely were, at least for me. My experience at both Epic and Riot was really good. The only disadvantage is that they're very large companies. They're several thousand employees. So that's great in the sense that you'll have lots of people to work with and learn from, and there'll be a lot of infrastructure to help you out. But your contribution to the company will be one of thousands. That doesn't mean it won't be meaningful, but you'll need to pick your scopes carefully.
Awesome. Right. Uh, in the sort of subject matter of AAA studios, what are some like quick fire top tips that you can give that would make you more desirable for AAA studios, especially from the perspective of students that are about to graduate?
Yeah. So the biggest one is just not generally available to students, which is have AAA experience. If you can get like a internship or something, that's the best thing you can do. However, that's quite difficult, especially from Australia. So I think having a portfolio is really high on the list. Having worked on a game, preferably one that shipped, even if it was a game jam game on itch, like just having something to point to, saying, "Look, I did this," and basically being very clear about what you want to do at the studio and what skills you can bring. Like in the indie world, you can be artist, designer, programmer, publishing expert. Like you can do all of it. At AAA studios, they're big enough that they're looking to specialize. So when you're applying, you really want to convince them that that there is one specific thing that you want to do for them, and you can do it. So, like if they're looking for a programmer, tailor your application to, hey, I can program games. Here's some examples. Even if the examples are school projects or game jam projects.
Yet again, another great answer. Okay, so you mentioned earlier wanting to, or saying that people should try and find people on Twitter, and other potential social media platforms to network. Would it be good to DM people, who have a similar role to you, and particularly for what you're aiming for? So, for instance, messaging a game designer at Riot Games and then ask them for advice because you want to be a game designer.
Yep. It will definitely depend on each individual developer as to how open they are to having those conversations. But in my experience, most developers are quite happy to talk to you about career issues, whether that's working at the place they work at or getting into the career discipline that they're in, or just talking about games development in general. Um, the some people I know who are a little bit more visible get a lot of these requests, so they might instead of being able to engage with you individually, will point you at some resources. Like I know one developer who basically has a so you want to get into game design copy pasta that uh, isn't them trying to be impolite, but it's like, hey, I get asked this question a lot, and so here are the resources that will be helpful for you. Here's one I prepared earlier. But for example, for me, I'm always excited to talk to people in my DMs about getting into games. I'm basically excited to talk to anyone about anything except getting free skins in Fortnite or League of Legends or Valorant, which even though I haven't worked at Riot Games for almost 2 years, I almost every day get a message asking for free skins. So as long as your message is, hey, I would like some guidance about game development, you have a very good shot of getting some good tips or even making a connection that could recommend you later on in your career.
Awesome. Okay, so as for Riot, how is the quality of life working there? Partially working for the company itself, but also where you were living while working for them at the time.
Yeah, so I moved to Los Angeles to work at Riot Games, and LA has a reputation for terrible traffic and being big and sprawling. So I made it sort of a deal with myself that if I moved to LA, I was going to move to a place where I could walk to work. That did cut down my options significantly and raised my rent a fair bit, but it meant that my quality of life in that aspect was very high at Riot. The neighborhood that their campus is in is actually very nice. Their campus itself is very nice, so like having a lifestyle where I could walk 15, 20 minutes, get to work, and then walk back was really good. For most of my time at Riot, the hours were extremely reasonable. There were a few longer weeks when we were getting near to the launch of Valorant and during the initial live service, but nothing that you could describe as crunch. It would just be like, hey, we've got deadlines. See if we can hit them, but nothing like massive overtime or anything like that. I found that both Epic and Riot sort of pattern themselves a little bit on the tech company culture angle, where they try and provide a lot of amenities to their staff. They try very hard to be accommodating, and they understand that the work that game developers do is collaborative and creative, and try not to be particularly regimental in things like when does the workday start and how much time do you need to spend at your desk every day. Stuff like that is generally not a part of the culture of American AAA studios, especially those that are working on live service games. Basically, I found working at Riot and working at Epic to be very similar to my time working at Google in terms of like lifestyle and like just work environment. So highly recommended.
Okay, so we have another question. So for people interested in starting a career in software engineering and computer science, would you recommend studying computer science or software engineering itself, or would you recommend something else?
So some of the best software engineers I've ever worked with have had no degree at all or a degree in something unrelated to computer science. But that said, a software engineering or computer science degree is a really great way to get a tour of the discipline. Um, you'll learn a lot of the theory that will be useful to you later, and also just get a lot of exercise and experience programming, which at the end of the day, that's what a lot of software engineering is about. Um, it's also fine to major in something else and just take some programming classes, but the further away from a software engineering or computer science degree that you get, the more you're going to be relying on a portfolio of projects to demonstrate, or even coding tests at some companies to demonstrate that you are in fact going to be useful as a software engineer in those roles.
Awesome. So we have a question about indie games. So from your perspective, what are some tips that you could think of for increasing an indie game's probability of success, especially in places such as Perth, where there aren't that many people to potentially show the game off to, and things like that?
I mean, the question asker has gotten right to the big piece of advice that I would give there, which is that like most indie games will live on or die on the visibility and marketing behind them, and um, if there's not a lot of exposure you can get through in person stuff in Perth, though, there's not nothing. Perth Games Festival's great. Um, you're gonna have to just work extra hard online. It's the same thing. Like there's I think building a community via like a Discord community, Twitch, trying to find ways to get people to see your game and to understand why it's cool is going to be the biggest asset that you have that will determine your success or failure. It is a separate set of skills, like um, marketing, community management, all that is like whole new disciplines that you'll have to learn. But I think it's very important, especially for smaller indie teams. If you are a slightly larger indie team or your game is particularly well polished, then there are publishers out there that can help you with this visibility side. There are more and more indie scale publishers these days too, but there's a cost. Like you will get help with a bunch of things that you might not be good at, including marketing and localization. But then the publisher will want to recoup those costs out of your sales. So if you can do it yourself, I definitely recommend it. And yeah, even when we talk about visibility, it's not about necessarily buying ads or getting streamers to play your game. There are a lot of ways to try and build an audience. They all require legwork and authentic engagement with the communities that you're targeting. So like if you basically look for people who might like your game and then go earnestly tell them about it, and then do that again and again. And to be honest, I think that's the best way to give an indie game a shot at reaching the audience that it deserves.
Okay, so our next question is you mentioned providing specific pieces when applying for a job with applications. What kind of pieces and pieces of work would you recommend using, and maybe how many, or what kind of quality do you think would be good to aim for?
Yeah, so basically the thing that you have in your portfolio that is most relevant to the specific application that you're writing is like what you should go with. Like if you have multiple things that are relevant, great, point at them all. But at the end of the day, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's reviewing the applications, and know that the thing to optimize for is the ergonomics of the reviewer. So like ideally, like say it's a free form application and you're just like submitting kind of a cover letter or a resume. Having a section that's like like here is the name of an indie game I worked on. I did this part. Here's a link to more information. Or if you're an artist, having a particular portfolio gallery that's relevant to this particular application, so you can send them to ArtStation or something, but more specifically to a page on ArtStation that's only going to show them the things you want them to see. They can always click around and see your other stuff too, but they're probably only going to spend 15 seconds on the landing page before they make a decision on whether or not you're worth further investigation. So you really just want to optimize for that first look of like, hey, you're looking for 3D artists for hard surface. Here is my ArtStation gallery that just has 4 examples of hard surface stuff I've done. And then like for the next job you apply for, if it's a character concept role, have a separate folder in your ArtStation or other portfolio site and send them to that. So when they open it, they can be like, oh, here's a character sketch. Rather than here's just my portfolio in general, because it's hard for the person reviewing it to take a cohesive message from it instead of like, oh, this person's done a bunch of stuff. You want to like that you understand that they're trying to hire a person to do a certain thing. You're just trying to convince them that you can do the thing. And even like some cases, your portfolio links won't even be clicked on. So anything you can do to annotate them. So if you have like a link to a piece, like a GitHub repository, if you're a software engineer or something, there's a reasonable chance it won't get clicked on. But just the description, like, hey, I don't know, a occlusion culling occlusion culling algorithm test, and then a link to some code. And they may never click on the code, but just knowing that you're like highlighting that here's a thing that you think that's relevant to them. If they read the title and go, oh yeah, that does sound relevant to me, that's like 80% of the job done there to get you to the next round.
Oh, there we go. Sweet. Yeah. So, back to the Perth scene. It seems that for the local Perth game dev scene, marketing in particular is especially important. For an indie studio or like a team of students, how much time do you think should be spent working on marketing and building a social following, as opposed to developing the game?
Okay, so first caveat is this is like getting fairly far afield from my area of expertise. So like, don't take my word for it. Find some experts online. But personally, I think the ratio should change the further you get into development. When you're first starting the development of your indie project, you should be spending almost none, like maybe a tiny amount of time on marketing and community development. Maybe set up a Discord server, maybe set up a Twitter, maybe create a email mailing list, but don't put a lot of time into like recruiting people or sending out lots of content for these. But as you get towards launch and you get further into development, you should be ramping this up. One rule of thumb is, as you have more cool things to show, you should do more marketing to show people those cool things. And it's quite reasonable for you to get to the immediate time before launch, your month, 2 months before launch, and be spending the vast majority of your time on marketing efforts. But I don't think you should start there. It should start very small and ramp up during your project's lifetime.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got a bit of time left, so we'll ask you some more that the team have been wanting to ask. So in particular, how do you feel about the competitive nature of getting a job at Riot as say a 2D artist? Would you say that's particularly different from what you've already described, or is it pretty on par?
So, as a 2D artist in particular, I think it is relatively similar to what I've said so far, but with the added wrinkle that when you're looking at assets and concept and illustration, there are more outsourcing and contract roles in the mix, which can sort of shift the process-oriented nature of getting a job. Like, for example, a fair amount of splash art for League of Legends skins is done by contract illustrators or outside illustration studios, and so you can, if your goal is to work on that kind of stuff, it may end up being better to try and seek out those studios and work with those directly. But everything else basically holds true. A lot of it will come down to hiring need. Like, for example, say Valorant Esports is looking for someone to help them with creative assets to help for broadcast, and they need a concept artist or illustrator for that. The first people who are going to get a call for that are the people that are known to the people who work there already. So if you know someone there and they know you're looking for work, you're much more likely to hear about those opportunities. Or if they do get advertised on a website like Riot's career page, being able to talk about the role with someone at the company will greatly increase your chances.
Okay, awesome. We've got one last question for you, and this one might be potentially fun to talk about. But have you ever had an experience with a particular bug or exploit used by cheaters in one of the competitive shooters that you've worked on that you've continuously had to try and fix that's been particularly persistent or something like that?
Yeah, so persistent bugs used for cheating, there have been a few that have taken a while to stomp out. Sometimes it's because we don't fully understand what the exploit is, and we're patching at what turns out to be a symptom. Sometimes there's some inherent limitation to the game that makes it very hard to fix. One that comes into mind a lot is vehicles in Fortnite. A lot of there's been a lot of exploits that involve vehicles. One of the ones that I worked on for a while is that if you fell out of the sky from a great height and landed on a big rig truck, the collision might end up putting you underneath the map. And the problem with being underneath the map in Fortnite is that you can shoot people because the floor of the world is like one-sided polygons, but they can't see you or shoot you back. So you can just like run around under the terrain and shoot people. That took a long time to fix because there wasn't one particular cause. It was a bunch of different physics bugs. And the reason for that is because up until recently, the vehicles in Fortnite have been client authoritative, because one of the hardest things to do in network gameplay programming is networked vehicle physics. And so one of the things you can do as a shortcut is to not have the server resolve all the physics and have each client simulate the physics independently and just hope that it comes out more or less the same. This is also the reason that for a while there were cheats that you could get that would make cars in Fortnite fly, which again, very easy to detect, but was very hard to fix. But with some of the physics works that was being done for Unreal Engine 5, the Fortnite gameplay team has found a way to accurately and cheaply simulate physics, including vehicle physics, in a network-aware way. So it took a while, but cars are less janky now than they used to be.
Awesome. Yeah, those are all our questions. Thank you very much for talking, and I'm sure everyone got some awesome information out of that. I know that I did. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
No, thanks for inviting me. I love to talk about game development. So if anyone has any further questions, feel free to look me up on Twitter and send me a DM. I'm always happy to chat.
Awesome. So now we have Julian.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hello.
Hello. Oh, before I get started, I just wanted to say those two presentations and discussions were very, very good. I really enjoyed them. Maybe a couple of comments before I present my own piece. I thought Paul's advice on how to enter the industry were absolutely spot on, frankly. I couldn't have phrased it better. On the anti-cheat stuff, having worked on a competitive shooter myself, I cannot overemphasize the criticality of this particular expertise, which we pretty much underestimated on my own project. And when it comes to Michael, I've followed Michael for the last couple of years. I actually used to work with his brother, whom he talked about briefly, and the sheer amount of passion in their craft is heartwarming. So I hope MISC will go and be a huge success. That's my hope. My presentation is a little bit different. I'm a video game producer, so I'm going to focus a little bit less on the engineering craft or design and art, and actually talk about my stuff. And it's a bit more of a story, which I'm going to walk you through. So I'm going to share my screen. If you could tell me whether or not you can see it. Are we good?
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. So we'll try to cover that in less than an hour, hopefully, but it's 20 years, so it's a long journey. So my name is Julien. This spelling is the French version of Julien with an A, and I've been making games for 20 years now. What I'm going to do is we're going to go through a bit of a story and a journey that starts at Electronic Arts 20 years ago. So the starting point is in 2002 in a city called Lyon. It's the second biggest city in France. I entered Electronic Arts. I applied as a translator and didn't get the job, unfortunately. Wasn't quite good enough in English, but I was offered a role as a localization tester, which I had no idea what it meant. And it's one of the roles that is a good point of entry into the industry, especially if you're coming from a different cultural background. So the process of localization is actually quite simple. It's the process of modifying your software and translating text so that it's more suited for a specific area or a specific language. So in my case, working for EA, we were getting games built primarily in English, but also in Japanese sometimes. And our role was to convert that for our target audience and target market, which in my case was my country of France. So as a localization tester, I would come in at the end of the translating process and make sure that the text was appearing properly on screen through dozens and dozens of screens, but also going through things like the manual or the back of the box, or listening to all the audio dialogue and ensuring that there was no mistake. Otherwise, I would just report bugs like a QA tester would. So we started working for that group back in France. This is the four guys that I used to work with. Usually, the localization testing effort would start at about alpha and goes until submission to first party. So that's Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony. And we had to adhere to their strict guidelines, which there were a lot of. And if you don't, your game gets rejected. So it was pretty critical that we wouldn't mess up with the schedule and actually deliver against the expectations. Some of the projects that I worked on are on this screen here. So I started on The Sims Deluxe Edition on PC, moved on to work for EA Big, which had a line of products, including Freakstyle on PS2. I worked on Fight Night 2004 and a game called Def Jam Fight for New York. I also worked on a lot of EA Sports games, which I will touch on in a bit. And that was great because it really gave me a good overview of the business coming from the linguistic perspective. But I mean, I grew up as a gamer. I started playing on Amstrad CPC 464 back when I was 8 years old, and then I moved on and got pretty much every single console. And as a kid, I was a huge EA Sports fan. So for me to actually work for EA was a bit of a dream come true. One of my first big project was 007 Nightfire, which was in Redwood Shores, which is where the headquarters of EA is located. So what they would do is when there was a particularly high-profile project, instead of doing the work from my country, we were flown into the dev studio. So in that case, Redwood Shores, and we would go on for 45 days straight. Back in the days, and hopefully things have changed quite a bit 20 years later, we used to do a lot of really, really long hours. The video game industry was quite rough from that perspective. And it was also one of the first multiplayer games back in the days for EA. And so we really had to do a lot of solid coordination across the board. So I would be there testing the game in France, but there would be a German guy, an Italian guy, a Spanish guy, etc. And we would coordinate to do the proper loc testing for both the single player campaign as well as the multiplayer experience. And the interesting bit for me, being very curious and loving the video game craft, was actually having an opportunity to sit down with developers and explaining how I got to a particular localization bug. And through that process, learning how games are developed and some of the pitfalls that lead to some of the bugs that I was experiencing. So I did that for 2 to 3 years, and I was lucky enough to unlock an opportunity to move to EA Sports in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I spent the next 5 years now. You have to understand, as a kid, I had two passions in life: basketball and video games. And in 2004, I joined the EA Sports studio behind FIFA, NHL, and NBA Live, which was the game that I was a fan of when I was a kid. And that was just an absolute passion. So here you have a campus. Paul was talking a little bit about some of those big campuses that you have in North America. EA Sports was one of them, and it was a fantastic place to work. This is actually a sports pitch where we used to play soccer every lunch, and it was before the Googles and all that kind of stuff. So it was really, really exciting to work in that space. So the first phase of my career was localization, and that's how I got lucky enough to get into the industry. And then through establishing solid relationship with video game people and developers, I unlocked a position in production. The story is actually quite interesting. I didn't have access to the first floor at EA Sports, so I followed a guy who had the card to go upstairs. And then I landed on the NBA Live floor, and I followed. I kind of like looked around, and I looked at some doors that were closed, and that meant that they were like, the creative directors and the producers and the big guns. And one of them said Tim Turner, producer, and that was the producer of NBA Live. I literally knocked at the door. The guy opened the door, big German guy, and he's like, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Julien, and I'm a French guy, and I want your job. How do I get that?" It's a true story, guys. Well, he said, "Sit down, kid." And he sat me down, and he kind of like listened to my story, and he saw a very young, overly excited, super naive kid who just wanted to succeed, just wanted to become who he was one day. And a few months later, they actually lost a producer, and the production team, which was 7 guys, now 6, got together and talked to Tim and said, "We have to start interviewing and try to get the next producer." And he said, "No, we're not doing that. We're getting the French kid." And that is a true story, the one that I just went upstairs and literally knocked at the door. That's my story. That's how it worked. I don't know if it worked for many people, but it worked for me. So anyways, here I am now being a producer, at least an assistant producer on NBA Live 07, and basically started learning the craft of production, which I then carried for the following 15 years. There's 3 main phases. The first one is pre-production, where you discover, you plan, you design, and you prototype. You try to understand what it is that you're trying to build. Then you enter a longer phase, which is production. On an EA Sports title, it's usually 6 to 9 months, probably about 6, where you really know what you're doing, and now it's a matter of developing the content, producing the asset, and putting it all together. And then at the end of that journey is the post-production. It's more about the polishing, the bug fixing, testing, and going through certification with Microsoft and Sony and things like that. At EA Sports, what happens is that we do this every single year, and then we go on holiday. We got refreshed because it was a lot of work, and then we'd come back and do it for the following year. And that's how FIFA has been built for the last 25, 30 years now. My first role, coming from the localization background, was because I had spent a lot of time looking at screens and understanding the information that was pushed to the user. I had developed an affinity for something called UX, user experience, or UI, user interface. And naturally, I became the guy in charge of UX. Even though I had very little training in that background, I actually did graduate in multimedia design. So it was a bit helpful. Like, I had some good foundations for that. So what I did here is to design and execute all the screens in the game, and there were a lot of screens. So here on the left-hand side, you will see my first mock-up at the top. So if you're an NBA fan, you will know that there are 2 teams, the Miami Heat and the Phoenix Suns. And what we were trying to convey here is, in one simple image, understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of each team, but also the starting 5. So the 5 key players, or the 3-5 key players, and so that the user could easily choose what team they were going to pick when they were playing against each other. It's just one example. At the bottom, you can see the actual screen that we shipped. Remember, that's in 2007, so that looked a little bit different and not as high def as it does today. But I think that gives you the sense of the kind of stuff that we were doing. So the definition of producer is different between companies, whether it's EA or Ubisoft, which I'll talk about in a minute. At EA, it's very much a product manager, a game designer, so very much on the what instead of the how. So I cranked thousands and thousands of pages of design documentation, and a lot of time thinking about the flow and what the screen should look like. So that was my first job as a UX designer and producer. I was also the guy in charge of online. So online 20 years ago was a different beast. Nobody really wanted to touch it because it was scary and hairy. And because I saw that, and I considered myself probably a little bit less gifted than the other guys around me, I decided to go right in, because I was like, nobody wants it, I'm going to take it. And by doing that, actually, I ended up sticking to online for the rest of my career, interestingly. So back in 2008, we worked on a feature that was called Online Team Play, and it got the award for the Innovation of the Year at E3, which was a big pat on the back for us. So historically, when you play an online game, an online sports game, if I play against Paul, for example, we will both pick a team, and we'll go one-on-one, but we'll have 5 players on the court. For the first time, we actually put 10 humans on the court at the same time, going through an actual server. So that was 15 years ago. So that's the first thing that we did, which was a big success. And then I was also in charge of the DLC, which is the downloadable content pack. A lot of really hairy, complex things around matchmaking, leaderboards, leagues, and tournaments. And another thing that we did is the dynamic DNA, which was a really, really cool feature. And what it was, sorry, that's the one that got the innovation of the year. What it was is that we would partner with a data analytics team called Synergy Sports Technology. And what they would do is that they would watch every NBA game every single day and enter data on everything that every player did that night. And overnight, that data would get piped into our game, and the game would actually be adapted to reflect what happened last night. So if you had a Kevin Garnett, for example, that had a fantastic shooting night, and you'd pick up your NBA Live game the next day, his shooting percentage would reflect what happened last night, which was really, really cool. So that's some of the stuff that we did back in the days. Another part of my role was being in charge of the visuals and the ads. So spending time in motion capture, assigning the proper heads or body types to each of the 350 NBA players in the game, overseeing the rendering, making sure we had 60 frames a second in our product, crowds, mascots, cheerleaders, things like lighting, making sure that each lighting in the 30 arenas was actually exactly the same as Madison Square Garden, for example. So this was a good overview of different kind of crafts. One I didn't talk about is the ad space. So for the first time, we integrated Sprite into our product and managed to get some money out of it, which was also good to pay for the development. At EA and a little bit at Ubisoft as well, what happens is that towards the end of the product, it's not good to have producers around you because we get annoying. What we do is that we keep pushing for improvement and improvement and improvement. And if you listen to us, you never ship the game, which is a problem. So what EA did is that they would put us on a plane and they would kick us out for the last 3 months, which was a fantastic idea and totally worked. And so the development directors would take from us and effectively finish the game whilst we were busy presenting our game either in North America or in Europe. And you know, Paul was talking a little bit about marketing, making sure that you were talking about your game in a cohesive way across different countries, but also being a good public representative for your project. So spending quite a bit of time with journalists and trying to get the community and the journalists hyped about your game. So I spent 7 wonderful years at Electronic Arts. It's a fantastic company. I can't speak highly enough. But a bunch of things changed in my life, and it was time to go back to Europe. So I came back to the UK and actually started working for Disney. So in 2009, Disney had a big push into video games, and they started acquiring different developers. Companies like Avalanche, for example, in Utah, that was doing Toy Story. I'm sure that Michael can relate to that. And I was joining a racing studio in Brighton, which is the southern tip of the UK. Now, the company was called BlackRock Studio, and they were behind a game called Pure, which is a ATV game, and before that, a franchise called MotoGP. You might have heard of them. I joined them in the early stages of a game called Split Second, also known as Split Second Velocity in Europe. And what it was really, it's an arcade racer where not only do you control your car, but you can also have an interaction on the track itself. So you can trigger shortcuts, you can blow up explosions as if it was like a reality TV kind of concept. So it was a pretty cool game where we had like a 80, 85 Metacritic, I think 84 we ended up, which was pretty good. And I really, really enjoyed it. And again, I came in as the UX guy. Now, a full disclaimer, I actually don't think I was a very good designer, frankly. I was somewhere between a producer and a designer, but I gave it a good crack and I did my best. So the third phase was really for me to focus on the design craft and moving out of pure production and into design, interacting with other designers. Now, I was in charge of three things: the season mode, the online, again, and the HUD as well. So the heads-up display, which is what you have in front of you as you're driving your car. Now, we had a technical issue whereby the actual front-end engine wasn't ready, and it wasn't going to be ready for the next 9 months, which, as you imagine, was a problem because a lot of the UX is about feedback loops and putting your ideas in front of a real customer and getting some feedback. But if you don't have that capability into your product, you're quite limited. So we literally went back to pen and paper for 9 months. That was the only thing we had. So we used the big foam boards that you have on the right-hand side here to actually visualize the flow that we were going through. And we were trying to collect some feedback and tweaking based on that. Brighton had a relatively thriving gaming scene with a lot of people who were into games, so it was easy for us to partner with the local schools and universities and the fans and try to get them in and actually look at our game and provide us with some feedback. Here again on the left-hand side, you can see a before-after. Before, which was like, this is roughly what we're trying to get to, and then at the bottom, the version that we ended up shipping with. If you have a minute, take a look at one of the videos of Split Second. You will see that the actual front end, which is like the menu system, was entirely built in 3D, which in retrospect was an enormous and very expensive thing to do. But you know, when you love video games, it's kind of cool to say that you were able to do that. But boy, was that difficult and expensive. So here's a quick interface evolution from January 2009, where we were trying to show a very basic heads-up display of your power gauge at the bottom, your position, your points, and the lap that you're currently on. And highlighted in blue is one of the power play, which is one of the things that you could trigger that had an impact on the track that you were racing on. And that's the final version with the motion blur and all that kind of stuff. So I did that for a year and a half and really proud that we were able to ship Split Second. It shipped at a time when 2 more games were releasing, Mod Nation Racer and Blur at that point. And so we sort of like cannibalized each other because we literally shipped on the same day. So it ended up not being a huge commercial success. And you know, that what happened is that unfortunately, like a year later, I think Disney decided to shut down some of the studios, and one of them was BlackRock, which is a bit of a sad story, but it is what it is. And unfortunately, is the reality of our business sometimes. An interesting interlude happened at that point. You can probably see a bit of a trend in my presentation. I like discovering our planet. And so at that point, I had an opportunity to join an ex-colleague of mine from EA who had moved down to Buenos Aires. And that was my first introduction to the mobile space. So I worked for a company called SGN, Social Gaming Network, which was acquired by Jam City later on, and they're still active in Buenos Aires. And it was a casino game, interestingly, which was my very first mobile game. And it was my introduction into the wonderful world of free-to-play, which was a bit of a departure for me, coming from the PC and console world for the last 15 years. And I was a game director, whatever that means. I guess my role was to oversee the team. And, you know, I had a team of 50 people in that studio: game design, production, engineering, art, QC. And we had a good time. We actually worked on this project I came in for the last 3 months and looked at it again from a UX perspective, and I was in charge of the tutorial. There were a few things that were interesting for me in that transition. The first was really to understand the new input system. So going from 15 years of gamepad to a touchscreen and rethinking the interaction of the customer, understanding things like compulsion loops and the free-to-play and monetization learnings, which was going to come in and be quite helpful for the later part of my career, which I will explain, and the psychology of spending. So the problem with free-to-play, which is also a blessing, is that you don't have $100 coming in from day one. You get nothing. You have to have a product that is easy to install, easy to play, and then compelling enough and engaging enough that over time you're able to accumulate sufficient funds to continue to build your product and to continue to pay your team. And so that was a bit of a mindset shift for me coming from the traditional console and PC games. But super interesting. And then I did a bit of a pre-production on Mini Cafe, which ended up shipping about a year later on the App Store. I read somewhere that we ended up first and number one on the App Store for Mini Casino Tycoon, which was a huge surprise. I discovered later on, surely not something that is as easy to achieve these days than it was back in 2010. We're done with Jam City. We're now flying all the way to Singapore, where again, we're talking about relationships and knowing someone from before. The guy who hired me at Ubisoft Singapore is someone I worked with at EA Sports Vancouver in 2004. And so here I am 16 years later working for this person again. So it's a very small community of minds. And I worked in that building for 7 years. Now, I joined as the producer for a project called Ghost Recon Online, which shipped as Ghost Recon Phantoms on Steam in 2014. And it was my first real game as a service experience. And boy, was I in for a bit of an eye-opener. Now, game as a service is very interesting. And what happened back then, especially in Asia, was that we were confronted with a bunch of very ambitious and agile and fast companies like Riot with League, but also World of Tanks, and they were really gaining more and more market share. And so Ubisoft was starting to pay attention to that and say, okay, that's something that seems we should be learning about, and we had to really reinvent ourselves. So here is the problem. Ghost Recon Online / Phantoms was built with a game engine called Yeti, which was built for a box product. And all of a sudden we say, we're going to put this online and it's going to be free to play and you're going to have an update every 2 weeks. Well, guess what? The engine was never built for that. So what we had, and we didn't have the expertise for that either. So there are a bunch of things that needed to change. First, we need to understand and find the free-to-play formula. We needed to create a pattern where instead of, spending whatever $1 million and then getting all this money and then recouping your spend, we needed to have a long tail of recurring revenue, which you could only get through regular updates. And we just didn't know what we didn't know. So there was a lot of unknown. And now, as a producer, what you do is you look at two things. You look at people and you look at process. And the other part of the equation is the creative and the design and game directors and all that kind of stuff. My role for 4 years was to ask the following question. How do I build this game as fast and as well as possible with the 110 developers that I have? And how do I get them to release an update to this product every 2 weeks? Now, that's when the world of Agile came in. And I started training myself and teaching myself and teaching my team how to go and understand Agile and Scrum. And that became the next decade of my craft, is how to organize a team around that. Now, we're not going to go into Agile and Scrum, but if you're interested in the process of making large-scale games, I recommend you look it up. There's a lot of very interesting videos online. So it was a bit of a mess. Coming from a process perspective, we had a lot of backlogs, a lot of ideas. Everybody wanted to do a lot of things, but we had no systematic process of how to push this live for the customers every couple of weeks. The first thing we did is we really cleaned up the process whereby all of the ideas were in one central location. The producer was gathering all the requirements from these stakeholders, putting them into a backlog, and then every 2 weeks we would go through a prioritization exercise and translate those into tasks that the team was able to deliver live for the customer. Now, the problem is that when you talk about a Scrum team, usually you have a team of like 5 to 10 people that you organize. Now we had 110 people. So how do we do this? And it actually got worse in the future with bigger projects. What we did is that we identified who was the chief product owner and who were the trusted product owners per domain expertise. And then underneath that, we would assemble teams of 5 to 10 people that were delivering value against those different areas of focus. Just a few numbers about Ghost Recon Phantoms. So 110 at peak in Singapore, but also people in Romania, people in Chengdu, Shanghai, North Carolina, and an operations team in Montreal, San Francisco, and Paris. So the team was 150, and we had ops as well. We had one major patch, which included a new map every 3 months. And we had, as I said, multiple releases every couple of weeks. We ended up shipping 52 product increments to the customer over a period of 4 years. We spent a year and a half in beta. That is not a good thing, guys, by the way. That is not a good success, but it's just the reality of the delta between what we knew and what we had to learn. And I had 8 project managers just for the dev team. The biggest challenge, I'm actually going to start and go back to what Paul presented. Anti-cheat was one of the very highest challenge that we had to deal with, and something that should not be underestimated, especially when we go to Russia, because this is when the real crafty cheaters will come in and break your game. That was the case for us. Now, the biggest challenge was technology, primarily. So going from console to PC, looking at compatibility and performance, deploying a game online was a big undertaking for us, coming from a box product mindset. And really shifting to that free-to-play model where it's all about acquisition, retention, monetization, and cost. So it's an equation that you have as a producer. You have to always balance a bunch of things. First of all, acquisition. So user acquisition is marketing. How much money are you going to spend to acquire as many new users as possible to come into your space, your ecosystem? Then retention, also called CRM. Retention is about how do I keep you engaged in that product to make sure you don't churn, as in you don't go and play another game in the same space. So that, because at the end of the day, a lot of the customers that are going to come in, you're going to need to retain, and over time you're going to turn them into monetizing players, which are those that are investing in your product. And if you don't have enough people who monetize and stay in your ecosystem, unfortunately, it's the end of the journey, and this is why Ghost Recon Phantoms shut its door in 2014. It's not about greed; it's about making sure that you can pay your team. It's that simple. Huge, stiff competition in our shooter space. Already back in 2012 to 2014, it got even worse since then. But it was great because we were learning a lot of things. So that was an exciting time. The next phase is collaboration. So for the next year, I worked on Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It was a huge deal for me because I was a big fan of Assassin's Creed, starting with Assassin's Creed 1, but even more AC2. At the end of AC2, when I was playing it, I was still working for EA, and I remember sending my thoughts to a friend of mine who was now working for Ubisoft. And his reply was, "Dude, do you want to work for us?" It was that simple. I mean, this is, I probably got lucky, but this is the kind of thing that happened. So anyways, here I am now working on Assassin's Creed and finally fulfilling one of my dreams. Now, the one thing to know about Assassin's Creed, it is a ginormous beast. There's literally 900 people working on AC. Valhalla probably got even bigger. But back on AC Syndicate, you had Ubisoft Quebec, which was the lead studio with 450 people. Montreal had 150. Singapore, we had probably about 100 people. Annecy, Montpellier, which were two French studios, smaller scale, probably 30 or 40 people. Reflections, which is in the UK, Chengdu and Shanghai in China, Kiev, obviously, and in Ukraine, and there were a bunch of other studios. So imagine that in the middle of that is a bunch of collaboration producers who are supposed to coordinate technically, creatively, artistically with each other so that everything comes together. So that was my job. That was one of them. I was not the most important. There were other people much more important than me. So as the Singapore studio, we built 3 things in that game. The first was the Thames River, which was very critical because if you look at the city of London, it's literally split with the Thames River. And Assassin's Creed is all about exploration. And so you wanted to be able to cross that damn river literally 100 times a day. And so this is why we had to develop the traffic system, allowing you to cross that river in a very seamless way, but also create elements of gameplay on those ships and on that river. The second thing was a black box, which was a mission that you load in and out of, and it was the Tower of London. Now, the Tower of London was actually featured as the Gamescom demo, meaning it's good news for us, but it's also bad news for us because we had to polish the crap out of this thing. And because it was such a big focus, so Gamescom is like the European version of E3, and it's in Germany. It's once a year in August, and we shipped that demo, which turned out to be a blessing because we really had to make it such high quality that it ended up being one of the best missions in the game. And how do we know that? Is because in Syndicate you could actually rate your experience on the mission, and we had a really good rating, so we were happy about that. And then the last bit at the bottom was something called a time anomaly. So the time anomaly was, you're in the Industrial Revolution in London, but we really want to feature some of the buildings that actually came in a bit later in life. And so for us, it was Tower Bridge. And we would kind of like fast forward the player into World War I to have that experience, and then back into the Industrial Revolution. They did the same thing with Notre Dame in Paris in Assassin's Creed Unity. I'm just checking the clock, it's 38, okay. So Phase 7 was Elite Studio, and that was my last chapter at Ubisoft Singapore. I ended up working on a very complex, incredibly complex project called Skull and Bones, and I stayed 1.5 years on this project. Now, Ubisoft has a bunch of stories of games that are very difficult to ship. The Division is one of them. Beyond Good and Evil 2 is another one of them. Skull and Bones is another one of them. So this game has been going on for a very long time. There's a lot of resource online if you want to look it up and understand the genesis and the current status. But it's a very, very complex project. So the idea here is that as the Singapore Ubisoft studio, we had 2 expertise. One in open world Assassin's Creed and naval combat. The other one through Ghost Recon Phantoms on the multiplayer. So we said, let's bring those 2 things together and let's create a multiplayer naval experience. And that gave rise to Skull and Bones. So it was a very, very expensive project. You can read all that online. 8 years in the making, multiple reboots, very difficult. It's very important as a leader to set the right bar in terms of ambition versus the reality and the readiness of your team. And Skull and Bones definitely stretched that by quite a bit. And we went from pre-production to game reveal to first playable to E3 2017, which was my sort of like goodbye gift, goodbye celebration with Ubisoft. I cannot say enough good things about Ubi. I had a wonderful time working with them. They're a company that really give a shit about our craft and the quality of the games. And very briefly, that led me to Perth. I had the great fortune of joining a company called VGW here in Perth, and that's where I spent the last 4 years of my life on one of the buildings on this image. And I am in charge of the product incubation team. So I focus on mobile games, free to play, and specifically with a focus on casual. And what we do is that we have a team of about 20 people, and we build new products from scratch. We only invest in products with the highest potential. So very much following the Supercell model, whereby Supercell built 20 games, killed 16 of them, and the last 4 were big successes. So we get inspiration from that model, and we try to diversify VGW's core skill set from its historical core skill set towards more of, as I said, like the casual mobile gaming space. To do so, we have 3 phases. The first one is development leading to a prototype. At that point, if we feel that there's potential, we promote it to a live product. We start investing more heavily in live operations and marketing and things like that. Else, we kill it. And we've done that. We've built 10 games, we've killed 9 already. So we have no problem doing that. It's very important to pick and choose where you spend your time and focus. And then you keep going, and then the idea is really that if a product is going extremely well, then you promote it to the next big thing in the company. And we have yet to do that, unfortunately. But one of the products that we're currently working on has the potential to get there. So a couple of projects very quickly to give you a sense. The first one that you can play from Australia is a game called Four Sparrows Mahjong. It's a puzzle game. It's a very chill experience, and it's got a lot of very long-time legacy players that are there, and it's something that we've sort of stopped investing in, but we're quite proud. Quality-wise, it was on our journey to get to where we are today. And the next thing is Scratch Carnival, which we presented at the Perth Games Festival. And what that is, it's a bunch of scratch-offs on the left-hand side for the core, and then on the right-hand side, we've got a meta where you can build your own carnival. We've been at it for the last couple of years, and I've got a team of 20 people working on that right now. So, sorry, that was a long presentation. I apologize. I hope it was interesting. What I recommend is that I stop now and take any questions.
I can definitely say it was a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. And we have a bunch of questions for you. Starting off with someone in the chat who is currently a business analyst and a project manager at a small web development and consultancy company. Basically, he's wanting to know how a project manager / business analyst could make the move to being a project manager / producer and more of a game development focused studio. And if you have any tips on like application structure and methodology for that.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to business analysis and product management, there are so first of all, most of what we do now is moving closer and closer to understanding the data. So a mix of quantitative analysis, but also qualitative analysis. So I think that that being able to both look at data and understand what makes the difference when it comes to live operations on your retention figures, your monetization figures, is a key skill. And I think then on the product management side, from a skill set perspective, I think it's primarily about stakeholder management, understanding what is critical for the business, but also for your players, and being able to translate that into a backlog, a roadmap, and turning that into actionable tasks that your team can pick up. Now, honestly, I look at, we were talking about the Australian scene. I've recently done a full mapping of the Australian gaming ecosystem. There's 200 companies that I've listed. And I spent countless hours on their website, understanding what they are and what they do. And as we said, 50% of those are in Melbourne. But the amount of product manager jobs that I've seen is mind blowing, and business analyst and data analyst. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to enter the business through this route, is my take. Does it answer your question?
Partially, I think one of the things that they also wanted to know was, as they've been finding limited success with their applications, if there's something that you think is generally a winning inclusion in their application, or something that seen in an application will generally make people think twice about hiring them. If you have any opinions on those things.
I think okay. Well, let's kind of flip things around a little bit. So if I was on the receiving end and I receive an application from a business analyst or product manager to work for the company, there's two things. The first one is, what have you done before? Do you have any experience? And what are some of the companies that you've worked for in your past? And that's great. But the second is, how much homework have you done? So if someone approaches my company and I get a sense that there's a pretty solid amount of homework that was done in understanding my company, my product, and ideally telling me, I've seen that you currently have the following problems, and I think that here are a few ideas on how I think we could solve those problems. Now you've got my attention, because I feel that I'm not one of the 50 companies that you've applied for, but you've actually decided that this is the company that I want to work for, and you've done the homework behind it, and you've convinced me that you've spent the time to get my attention.
Okay, I think I'm sure that's probably answered the question pretty well. We'll move on to the next one. So what was moving from being in localization to being in production and being a producer like? Was that particularly stressful? Because it sounds like that sort of shift in responsibility would have been quite heavy.
Yes, it was. Actually, I have a bit of a sad story around this as well. So, and that that's just me sharing some of those war stories so that you guys understand like the kind of things that happened. A week after I started as a producer, Electronic Arts made 10% of their staff redundant. So we lost about 200 people in my studio, and one of them was sitting right next to me. And what happened is that the workload of this guy landed on my desk. So just to tell you about the stress, I went from being a new producer to being a new producer with the job of two people. So yes, it was stressful. Luckily, I didn't have children back then. I was incredibly passionate about my craft. And as I said, I had two passions: video games and basketball. And I was a basketball producer on a video game producer on a basketball title. So what I did is that I effectively accepted the added responsibility and the added workload. And luckily, I had a manager and a manager above that were shielding me very well from the external pressure. So all I had to do was focus on my stuff and deliver the highest quality that I could. So I think I got lucky as well because I had the right protection around me.
That's I can definitely understand the added pressure of having to take on that workload. I'm sure that's an awesome answer. So we've got a question in regards to DLC and microtransactions, and in particular, what your opinion on them are in games, as free-to-play games have been becoming very large, and there has also sort of followed with that a certain controversy from gaming communities and lawmakers in regards to gaming, or in regards to gambling and loot boxes. I was just wondering what your opinions on those are.
Okay, so there's a lot in that question. I think for me, over the last 20 years, I see three trends. The first one is as a player, you go, you buy your game, and there's nothing hidden. You know what you're in for. Good example, Breath of the Wild, one of the top 3 video games of all time in my books. I go in, I spend $100, and I'm just gonna absolutely love everything, and I don't need to give another cent. It's a contract between me and Nintendo. We're on the same page. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is the free-to-play space, primarily on mobile. Good example, Clash Royale, Royal Match, Candy Crush. You get 50 different options. You're going to choose the one that works for you, and you're going to play for free. Now, when you say you play for free, you have to understand that this game costs tens of millions of dollars to develop, and you get it for free. 96% of your customers are not going to spend a dime on it, and it's fine. It's okay, so long as the other 4% are paying your salaries. If they don't, it's game over. You have to shut down your game, and many people do it, including Supercell. So we don't have to convince every player. Like, I play both, but I know that it's a different part of my mind that is at play, depending on where we are. Chapter 3, play to earn, crypto. What I'm hearing today from the community is exactly what I heard 12, 14 years ago about free-to-play. Again, I don't have an opinion for or against. These are just different waves of our industry and how they are evolving through time. I personally, I don't judge. I look at it, I observe, and I understand what are the psychological patterns that make me buy into a particular game or another one. And then as a customer, I choose one or the other, or I choose not to buy into the third one. That's the extent that I'm going to go.
Okay, I think that's a really good answer, because that is definitely a topic that a lot of people have particularly strong opinions on, especially as non-game developers are concerned. I think that sort of riding with the way that the industry changes is a good way of sort of approaching it. And yeah, no, that's a great answer. So we'll move back a little bit and go towards something that's a little bit more lighthearted and probably much more at the core of your interests. What's one of your favorite parts of working on games?
Me personally, it boils down to people. I think that it's the people stories that I've developed over the years. As I said, like, you would have one person that you met 20 years ago, and then you work again with them 10 years later, and then 10 years later, and like just following how their craft evolved and improved was always interesting. So, and just the dynamics of understanding how people are wired, the experts versus the managers versus the what we call the individual contributors, and seeing that across hundreds of people, and how that it's almost like a microcosm of our world and how they operate with each other, and their strengths, their weaknesses, their personalities, how they match, how they clash sometimes, and you coming in and trying to make all this work nicely despite all those challenges is always something that I've found fascinating, very hard, to be honest with you. That would be the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer would be, and it's one that's weird and interesting at the same time, is I would say that the best project that I've ever been on was by far the hardest. But you understand that in retrospect. You look back, and looking at the Ghost Recon Phantoms experience, which was 4 years, which was a giant leap for a company like Ubisoft, which is 30 years old. It felt very, very hard at that point, but it's the one that I catch myself telling stories about constantly because we learned so much, because it grew me so much as an individual and as a leader. So yeah, I think it goes back to the people and the challenge. And just I love our stuff, man. I can't stop playing. I'm 45 years old and I still love video games. I can't help it. I might have a little bit less hair, but still love this stuff, man. Whether it's on my Switch, PS4, my phone, or just looking at stuff on Illuvium, all different shades of video games. I'm reading this right now. It's just a great set of stories of people who are like us. They love this stuff and they've been building games for a long time. So just the passion.
Yeah, that's a lovely answer. I think a lot of people can definitely relate to the idea of working with other people and being in that environment together, and particularly just, I mean, games are awesome. I think we can all agree on that. So lovely answer. So in particular with the Ubisoft projects, especially with Assassin's Creed, what are some specific problems that you think are worth noting that sort of arise with studios of such a massive scale, and maybe some things that people could expect if they found themselves on a similar sort of team?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much. Just controlling your scope is probably the one. When you have 900 people on the project, you got 450 of them have ideas, and half of them are awesome ideas. So how do you? But at the same time, you just know that you're going to ship on that date, and if you don't ship on that date, there's a range of problems that happens in terms of the financial results of the company and the share price and stuff like that. So you have to be predictable. So I would say control of your scope, and watching what you decide to innovate on. I think that in particular, like for a game like Assassin's Creed, they were very good at building on top of each other. So if you look at the Metacritic of Assassin's Creed Unity all the way through Valhalla, you're going to see just a gradual 3 to 5 points every year, 3 to 5 points. Boom, 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 85, 87, 90. And that's how you get there. But you can easily revert back and drop 10 to 20 Metacritic points and the sales that go with it if you don't control your appetite. And we've seen it. And then the time pressure comes in. You look at the stories like Cyberpunk, for example, or Anthem. When I saw those videos, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be phenomenal. And then unfortunately, things didn't pan out because it's a hard job to build these works of art and put them out and getting them to a shape where they become the next Zelda. There's a reason why those things take such a long time and require such expertise across hundreds of people. So it's a very complex thing to do, and picking and choosing what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, and being able to say no to things that you shouldn't do is probably a good discipline to learn, I would say.
Get another great answer. Thank you for that one. Okay, another question. If you're happy to continue. So we have a question in regards to your hopes for the games industry, particular what you hope the game industry is going to turn into. Maybe some worries you have or if there's anything in particular you're really excited to see.
Yeah, I will probably surprise quite a few of you guys with this one, but what the hell, I'm gonna go. There's something called Games for Change, which I'm particularly interested in. So I've got 3 young children, and I'll tell you guys a story. You know, I've been spending the last 15 years shooting people in the head and stabbing people in the neck for a living. And recently I was playing a game, and like my 9-year-old walks in and with her sister, and she's like, "Are these people all dead, Papa?" And I'm like, "No, they're sleeping." But in my head, I'm like, "They're dead. I just killed them all." And I just felt shitty as a father. And now I'm comparing this to other games like No Man's Sky, like Flower, like I could go on and on about games that are just beautiful works of art that don't necessarily include violence. And now I'm going even further, and I'm thinking about a game like Animal Crossing, where it doesn't have to be about violence. It could be just a beautiful experience that teaches things to people. For example, did you know that in Animal Crossing, during a period of time, people would be wearing masks in the game? I didn't realize that. My kid made me realize that. You got a way of like conveying certain messages and certain intentions through our medium, through our craft, that don't necessarily include a gun. My hope for the games industry is that we will learn to build beautiful stories that don't necessarily to have a gun on the front of the main page of the game, which is what Michael is doing, which is good.
Yeah, that's you're right there. That was maybe not an answer we were expecting, but that was a beautiful one. In the interest of that, I've posted the link to the website in the chat. So if any of you are interested in looking at more information related to Games for Change, feel free to look at that, as that's quite a I think an important thing for up and coming game developers to be aware of. What else have we got? So, okay. Right. So we've got another question. So what are your tips for limiting project scope, particularly combating things like scope creep? Because in student teams, amazing ideas always come up, but it's always hard to kind of pick which ones to take on and which ones to scrap. Do you have any particular bits of advice or tips that you think would
I've got the
help with
theory.
that?
I've
Yep.
got the theory. But I, like everybody else, I struggle as well because we love our stuff. It boils down to vision and strategy. So before you start building anything, the first phase, which is the early pre-production phase, is really about analyzing your landscape and looking at what are the best in class, what are you competing against. So the example I'm going to give is Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn, fantastic game. What they did very well is that they did a scan of the type of game they were competing against, and they identified what was the best in class combat system, what was the best in class navigation system, things like that. And what they did is that they picked and chose where they were going to innovate by 20%. And that's all they did. But they did everything really well. And they just innovated with the 20%, which is like, the lore and the world and like the kind of like the robot animals that you see and stuff like that, which was amazing. I would say my recommendation would be to identify clearly what's your audience, what matters to them, who are you competing against, and where are you going to push the envelope. And when people have cool ideas left, right, and center, you go back to that question. Is that what we said we were going to do? Yes or no? And as hard and as painful as it is, if the answer is no, you don't do it. You stick to your guns, and this is how people are able to deliver on time against their original vision. That's not a very cool thing to do, because we just want to do everything, but that's the realistic one.
I think that sort of sums it up pretty nicely. I think with that sort of thing, it is very much a sort of theory, not so much a concrete application for every scenario. I know I've had a lot of struggles with that particular area in the past myself. If we have any other questions, would love to hear them. But otherwise, if everyone sort of asked what they wanted to, this is sort of the natural ending point for at least the panel itself. If there are anything if there are any things that yourself, Julian, want to talk about, or maybe if Michael wants to come back and have a couple last words, we're happy to do that now. But otherwise, that's pretty much it.
I mean, yeah, I just wanted to say, like, fantastic presentation from Julian and sorry, I forgot the other person's name as well. But
Paul.
yeah, Paul. That's right. Sorry, Paul. Amazing presentations. I really loved, like, hearing their stories and kind of how they started out and where they are now and how they got there. I think I learned a lot from it, and it's really lovely to hear their journeys. So well done.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for coming. I'm sure everyone got heaps of good information out of that. If you have anything, any actionable links that you want people to go check out, any resources, you're more than welcome to post them in the server, and we will relay them to the stream. If there's anything that you wanted to highlight in particular, you're welcome to do that, and we'll pass it on. Otherwise, yeah, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your involvement, and we look forward to working with you again. As for the stream, thank you everyone for coming. Yep. All your questions were amazing. Really good engagement. We really appreciate it. It's makes events like these possible. And we hope that we'll see you around, and that you'll continue to engage in the things that we try to present.